Generally, we have these lectures at the Dupont Community Church, and thank God we didn't do it today because it would be hotter than the hinges of hell there this afternoon. And I can say that because I am a Presbyterian, so that's what we say. Right, Rebecca? She's a deacon, former deacon. So when Steve contacted me a few months ago and said, well, I'm going to be in town, what is it, we're in August?
Yeah.
Oh, jeez. And, we usually do these like in the fall. And I swear I couldn't turn him down because the name of his book and lecture is so fascinating, Dr. Tolmie. And every time he comes into town, we always have him come, don't we? Generally.
Try to get over here,
Yeah, you do. He comes over here occasionally to the low-income district from UP. So, anyway, just teasing. And today you bring your mother,
Yep.
Lorraine, is here. Welcome. And I don't know, a lot of you are friends of both Jerry and Steve's, but as you know, many of you know, Steve was the director of Point Defiance for a good decade in the 80s. He's currently the director of history of the History Museum in Cataract County in North Carolina. He cut his teeth on history. He did his internship, he did some work at the Pioneer Farm. This is his specialty. He may travel, you may go away, you may go to Colorado, but he always comes back here because this is what he knows and what he loves the best. And I think many of you know Dr. Jerry Ramsey. He's a wonderful author.
Thank you.
A wonderful historian,
Thank you.
a very handsome-looking, distinguished man.
Thank you. I think I'll come back.
Yeah. Am I done now? No. So he's got some wonderful books. He's a wonderful author, and he's got some wonderful books, and he's going to be signing them and hopefully selling a few for maybe you or your organization. I know we have several. We sell quite a few at the Dupont Museum. And speaking of Dupont Museum, how many people have been to our museum? Raise your hand. Okay. No, wait. How many people have not been to our museum? Okay, well, shame on you. So, Jerry, you're going to be there this afternoon? Oh, not today. Okay. Well, anyway, do pick up a brochure because it's more than just, this 1833, 1840, Hudson Bay history. It goes all the way to the Native Americans, and it goes up to Northwest Landing. You kind of wonder where these buildings came from and why. It's been a company town for about 4 or 5 eras, so including the Hudson Bay Company. So anyway, come in. It looks smaller on the outside than it actually is. So we're going to have a wonderful program, and then afterwards we're going to have some question and answers. And Becky from Lakewood Museum is going to make a few announcements too. So, okay, boys, are you ready? All right.
And thank you, Lee. Appreciate it. Here, direct from the East Coast of the United States, which I appreciate the fresh air. I can breathe. I don't have to run inside and breathe it. Anyway, thank you all for being here. A lot of you are my friends. I know you guys remember Pam. We've been in high school. Don, Gene. Some of you I don't know. But I got to tell you, I've been coming here to DuPont since around 1981, when this was all prairie and the fort sites were out here, and I was being toured around by DuPont and Weyerhaeuser people. I was involved in the dig that occurred at the 43 site, and I really, really appreciated the smoke today. The reason I say that is because that smoke has been a part of August and July of this area since it's been recorded since the 1830s. You look in the journal of the fort, and very often it says the plains are on fire. Smoke dense, cannot see beyond our 10 feet out. The burning of the Nisqually Prairie is a historic function. It happens every year, whether we live here or not. They say Native Americans often did that to drive the grass growth. Where I grew up in University Place, that was all prairie, and that's why no Native Americans lived there, because it burned every summer. So they didn't build villages on places that had burned. They built them in places that it didn't burn, like the mouth of Chambers Bay, up near Tidlow. Those places that they could get to the water quickly, because they knew that in the summertime, this is what happens. So historically, I look at this and I go, well, thank you, I'm back in Pierce County. Let's start with this, and I will first mention the fact that Jerry's going to probably pump my balloon up here pretty big, but I want to tell you something just in slight confidence that this project 4 years ago was in my ground cycle, ready to be heading off to the dump. I wasn't going to do anything with it, and I get this text from Jerry. He says, you know that project you were working on with all those letters from Tolmie? Let's do something with that. And I said, yeah, Jerry, I'm not too excited about that. But he kept at me and kept at me and kept at me. He says, well, I'll tell you what, if you can't find a publisher, I will publish it myself. And when he said that, I said, yeah, like we'll get like 10 people to buy it. And he says, no, I think we can get a lot more than that. So it's because of the guy sitting right here that this actually happened. If it wasn't for Jerry, this probably would still be sitting in my drawer back in North Carolina, ready for me to look at, but not for you to look at. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jerry Ramsey, PhD, who is my partner in this thing, and he claims he doesn't do much, but Jerry's my sounding board. We're kind of like Biff and Bart, we kind of like back and forth. And initially I had Jerry write the introduction to this book because he had similar ideas. And I didn't meet Jerry while I was working at Fort Nisqually in the 1980s. We met like 3 or 4 years after I had left. And by that time I was working in Renton, Washington with the Renton History Museum up there. And we got connected up and we started noticing we all had kind of the same ideas, that the history about Fort Nisqually, both the 33 site and the 43 site, was somewhat skewed, and somewhat wrong, and missing a lot of parts. And the book that I've been working on addresses some of those missing aspects, and we're going to talk about a couple of them today. And I think I just turn it over to you, Jerry, and let you go with your part here.
All right.
Right?
Can you hear me with this? Okay, I don't have any profound things to say. I mean, you probably already know half of what I'm going to talk about, but I'll do it anyway. Fort Nisqually was founded in 1832. It was some fur traders that were being transferred from Fort Vancouver to Fort Langley in what is now Canada. Those gentlemen needed a halfway point. They traveled that route several times. Needed a halfway point where they could stop and rest overnight and head on. Somebody suggested they build a Nisqually house on the beach right there beside the Nisqually village. The local native population was happy to do that because Hudson Bay Company brought goods they couldn't get otherwise. It was a good connection. I mean, think about if you were in a small town that was isolated from everybody else and Walmart came in, suddenly you've got jobs, materials, products, and employment. And you're the bee's knees, as they used to say, because every other person, every other tribe in the region wanted to know you because they knew you were going to get a discount at the store, and maybe even a spouse, you never know. So that was kind of the motivation of the first house. 3 guys stayed that first winter, 3 out of 9. The others went on up to Fort Langley, continued the job. Those 3 practically starved that year, except for the Indians, the Nisqually, who brought them food, dried salmon and so forth. In the springtime, more men came and they increased the supply of goods because they saw they could sell. Pretty soon, somebody suggests we ought to move up on the hill, up above the beach, where it's on the flatland, up here in the prairie. And that was the 33 side was on the beach, and the 41 side was up on the top. And then by 1843, they began to realize that there was a potential here for lots of agricultural and livestock production. By 1838, Puget Sound Agricultural Company was formed in London. Today we would call it insider trading and insider deals because every single share of the company of this new company, Puget Sound Agricultural Company, was purchased by a Hudson's Bay Company director. We would call that insider trading today. They paid a dividend at Puget Sound Agricultural Company from 1838 to 1934. So don't tell me that was not a successful company. They closed here in the United States, but they continued across Canada. The Puget Sound location here was the heart of the operation in the 30s, 40s, and the 50s. You'll read that in the book. They had, at their peak, 10,000 head of sheep, 8,000 head of cattle, at least 600 horses and at least 600 cows. They were selling dairy products to the Russian fort at Fort Sitka, the Russian fur company. One shipment, because they got behind in shipping their required amount for the contract, one shipment was 5,000 pounds of butter on one ship. Now tell me, they were in business. Can you see that? They were producing. There was a big operation here. They sold in London, what? Well, they sold hides, hose, and horns, and wool. The wool in London was competing with the flax that became linen from Egypt, if you can imagine. They were bringing beads, glass beads, from Venice to trade here. It was a big operation. They had a trade store in Yerba Buena. Ever heard of that place? You know, San Francisco today. They had a place in the Sandwich Islands, Hawaii. They were trading all the way along the west coast here from the northern border of California to the southern border of what is now Alaska, 5445, all the way to the Rocky Mountains, all the way up to Hudson's Bay. There were, at one time, over 100 places where Hudson's Bay Company shipped their food supplies, their produce from this place. Because fur traders can't grow carrots. They don't know how to capture furs. They don't know how to trade. They can't grow their own food, and they didn't want to either. Hang on for this one. At one point, to supply the animals here, a group of fur traders, now not cowboys, fur traders, went to California, somewhere around Vacaville, California, and gathered a herd, 3,600 herd of what? Cattle and sheep, and drove them overland through the Siskiyou Mountains, past Mount Shasta, through the Grants Pass, over trails that didn't even connect. There'd be a trail here and a trail here, and they tried to figure out how to connect those trails so they could continue on north. Eventually, most of those cattle got here. There were no bridges. They had to ford every single river, every single creek. There were hostile natives along the way who were hungry also. They saw cattle, they saw horses, they saw sheep, and that was food to those folks. Those fur traders, not cowboys, fur traders did this. Can you imagine? I-5 was not built. Highway 99 was not built. The road was not built. It was not a road. It was not even a continuous trail until these fellows did that. Now, hang on for this. That was before the big cattle drives from Texas that went across the Great Plains, which were easy by comparison. The only cattle drives in Texas before this one went from East Texas to Louisiana, about that far. Okay, Hudson's Bay Company built Fort Nisqually. It grew and grew, became this massive company, Puget Sound Agricultural Company. Fort Nisqually tends to rely on the fur trade idea because people understand that more than farming. But they grew turnips and potatoes and peas and potatoes. Turnips were so large they had to be cut in quarters so the cows could eat them. They couldn't open their jaw large enough to get onto the turnip. They grew every kind of grain you can imagine. Grain here in our wet climate, they grew barley and wheat and you name it, all those grains. Why did they do that? Because they needed food. Okay, at one point, Dr. Tolmie was shipping shingles to San Francisco because San Francisco kept burning itself down. He was paying 10 cents a bundle for a bundle of shingles on a trader's shoulder. He paid 10 cents for it. He sold them for 17 cents a bundle. That's a 70% profit. Tell me Puget Sound Agricultural Company was not profitable. It was a good company. All right. So now, let me tell you a little story that comes out of this. Those things are not in this book. You have to know that to get into the book. Let me tell you a little story that kind of comes out of the book, but doesn't finish in this book. It's the Damaris Cove. Some gold seekers from Olympia, I think there were 20 of them, left Fort Nisqually on the Georgiana, a sailing vessel. That vessel went to Queen Charlotte Islands, called Haida Gwaii today. That's the spot. Damaris Cove, Lafayette Balch's ship, you know Lafayette Balch, the founder of Silicon. His ship was inbound at Strait of Juan Fuca when the Georgiana was outbound. He agreed to meet them at Queen Charlotte Islands after he dropped his cargo in Silicon. The rest of the story is when the gold seekers got to the Haida people, they were captured. Their ship wrecked on a rock. The natives burned it, took all the metal out of it they could get. Captured every one of the men. Took their clothing away from them, all of it. Why? Because they had nice shirts. The natives wanted those shirts. They had nice pants. The natives wanted more. They decided to hold them for ransom. So they allowed 3 men on the ship. One of them was a fellow named Samuel Howe. Allowed him to take 2 others and row, I believe in the captain's gig, although they say a canoe. I don't think they rowed a canoe. I think they rowed captain's gig from, can you reach that? From that point there over to the mainland. Now, I've read several different routes, how far that is. But look at how close the island is to Vancouver and how close that dot is on the Queen Charlotte Islands in comparison. That's open sea, folks. 3 guys in a rowboat naked. Okay? They got to Fort Simpson. At Fort Simpson didn't have the supplies that the natives wanted for ransom. What did they want? They wanted a shirt for every man in the tribe, a pair of pants for every man in the tribe, and they wanted calico cloth, bolts of it, for the women in the tribe. Fort Simpson didn't have it. So the Beaver, the steamship Beaver, happened to be there and took the message down to Puget Sound to Silicon. Balch happened to have not left yet on his promised voyage, and he said, I'll go rescue them. U.S. history says he rescued them and it's over. The rest of the story, well, let me take a little pause here for the rest of the story. I have something to say about Steve. Before I tell you the rest of the story, I need to talk about Steve. This I wrote out because I don't want to make a mistake. If I stumble on it, you'll understand. Steve is a historian. That's capital letters with an exclamation. A remarkable title. Historians are concerned about what happened, why it happened, who was responsible, what can be learned from the study, what it tells us about the past as we look to the future. Historians explore conditions, chronology, motives, character, political and economic interests, and values. The best historians help us explain the truth without changing it. Finding the truth is the historian's only concern, and finding it is the quest for fresh insights and new evidence. Steve Anderson has devoted over 30 years to finding and telling the truth about Puget Sound in history. This book, Letters of William F. Tolmie, Fort Nisqually, 1850-1853, is the work of a true historian in capital letters. Give him some applause. Okay, now you've got suspense. You want to know what happened to these guys? They were all captured by the natives. The natives didn't threaten their lives at all. It just made conditions bad. Took their clothes away from them and made them live outdoors. I mean, ooh, wow. Anyway, Samuel D. Howe and the 2 others were allowed to row 140 miles across that treacherous open water. Get the message out. They needed to be rescued. Lafayette Balch agreed to rescue them with his sloop, the Damaris Cove. Damaris Cove is named after an uninhabited island in Maine, where Balch was from. He was heading to Gold Harbor to rescue these guys, and he got supplies at Fort Victoria. But before he could get the supplies at Fort Victoria, think about this. He wanted somebody to pay for it. He said he was a merchant, so he's not going to pay for it himself, right? So he goes to the customs agent for the United States government here in Puget Sound, a guy named Moses. Moses says, oh, sure. He writes a $1,200 voucher to the Hudson's Bay Company. Hudson's Bay Company accepted the voucher and gave him the goods, loaded him on the ship, and he was off. He went to Gold Harbor, what we call Gold Harbor today, and rescued the passengers and crew. They were still alive. No one died. And he took the cloth and the blankets. Well, I didn't tell you the blankets. They wanted a blanket for every man, too. Hudson's Bay Company blanket for every man. U.S. Customs Agent Simpson P. Moses is given credit for writing the voucher. But in addition to that, he went to Fort Nisqually, U.S. Army, for assistance. He said, Balch is a merchant. His ship doesn't have any guns. Can you send some soldiers? Captain Bennett Hill sent 5. 4 artillerymen and a corporal. He also sent 4 cannon. Now, I don't know about you, but I think it would take a little while to mount some cannon onto a merchant ship. So they mounted these cannon. After some time, they were ready to sail again. There are conflicting accounts. Steve says, no, it was all 20 from Olympia. But there's another account that I read that said there were 50 men from Silicon City. I doubt that, because I don't think the population was that great, but there's an account that says it. No matter. It was official business. United States government citizens were being held hostage, and the Haida and Queen Charlotte Islands were going to get the ransom, and they would be released. In this case, the Damarisco becomes a government vessel. It's been hired. It's a government vessel. 4 cannon from Fort Nisqually. That voucher, issued by Moses, was used to buy the ransom goods and pay the fare on them. End of story? No, not quite. That's the American version of to them. When the HBC tried to cash that voucher, the U.S. government refused. U.S. Treasury said, no way. Customs Agent Moses does not have the authority to write a voucher of such. And Captain Bennett doesn't have the authority to send our troops that far away from Fort Nisqually. Years went by. I mean, literally years. Balch, over those years, began serving in the Washington Territory Legislature. And Samuel Howe, the fellow who rode the boat, he was elected to be the territorial representative to Congress. Now, he didn't have a vote in Congress. He was a territorial representative. But he did have an opportunity to express his opinion. So, Balch and his group in Olympia wrote a memorial to Congress for Congress to consider approving this voucher. And Howe delivered it. Between the two of them, they finally got the money for the HBC to pay for those goods they bought. A little bit of a detail there in the end. The HBC was very, very instrumental. It wasn't just the American Balch who saved the gold seekers. Steve's letter book will tell stories like this, other stories, all the way through details of stories that are historically accurate. They're not a straight line story. They're going to weave and wobble, but you'll get them all put together, and you'll see this is a meritorious work. Thank you.
Jerry brings up a good point. We had some early on discussions about what form this book should take. Should it be a narrative? Should it be this? Should it be that? And one of the things we agreed upon right up front was, right now, as far as we know, he and I are the only people in this entire state writing about Fort Nisqually. There's no other authors, historians looking at this area, looking at this history, trying to decipher it. And we decided to do it this way because this way others can look at the material and come up with their own conclusions. You may get something completely different out of this than we did. And we wanted to kind of open this field up for people that are going after their master's and doctorate degrees in history. This stuff is not available really easy. I had to travel, at least in my mind, to Winnipeg, Canada, to Seattle, to Victoria, to San Marino, California. That's where the records are. That's where all of Nisqually stuff went. And this is part of the discovery part, that we are just going out and grabbing these pieces and putting them in order chronologically for the most part, so that these stories start coming out. I'd like to do with a couple other little interesting things. Jerry likes the Georgiana story, and it is one of those ones that it's in the book, but you have to kind of follow the letters and such. And James Douglas, who was the chief actor in charge of the entire fur trading aspects or the agricultural aspects of the company at this point, we think we had an interior motive to giving the goods very easily. He and Moses were not getting along. Moses was continually fighting the company on a number of fronts, and I'm going to get into why that was. I call this fake news in the early 1850s, and go ahead, Alex, hit the slide there. This guy, actually, we had a county named after him, that's Samuel Thurston. And he was our representative in the U.S. Congress back in 1850. And Samuel Thurston was diametrically opposed to the Hudson's Bay Company. He hated the British. He hated John McLaughlin, who was down in Vancouver. He hated Tolmie. He hated Douglas. He hated anything that had a British flag attached to it. We don't know exactly the reason, but he was a die-hard anti-British person. But he was also a U.S. Senator, and he also had a lot of control. So he comes up here, and I'll go into something what I call the tale of two tales. For those of you who don't know the history of Fort Nisqually, there was an attack at Fort Nisqually in 1849. It was in May, I think it was May 18th. A group of Tolmie Indians came down here under the guise of family rivalry with somebody here in Nisqually, and they got into a little row. And it was right at the Watergate. Watergate actually faces Center Boulevard. It was not the main gate of the fort, it was a small little gate. And in that melee, there were a couple Americans who happened to be visiting the fort at the time, and they were just standing to the side watching it. And in their ignorance, they said, well, this is obviously something between the British and the Indians. We're not involved. The bullets couldn't tell the difference. They killed Leander C. Wallace on the spot. And that is why Fort Steilacoom became what it is. Once you had an American citizen killed by Native Americans up here, it immediately became a U.S. Army issue. And that's when Fort Steilacoom came up here, the Army established Fort Steilacoom because of Leander C. Wallace's death. In this book, you find out a little bit more about this. That particular incident and the death of an American at Fort Nisqually caused a number of things to happen. First of all, when that happened, the U.S. government said, we want the killers of Leander C. Wallace. Dr. Tolmie, we would like to buy 80 blankets from you. As Jerry mentioned, blankets were big. They were kind of the gold standard around here. We'd like to buy 80 blankets from you, from your trade shop, and we would use those to ransom or to get somebody to turn in the killers. So that's the one story. And that happened. They turned in the killers. The people that turned in the killers got the 80 blankets that they had bought from the store at Fort Nisqually. Okay? Got that story in your head? Okay, there's the one blankets and Tolmie story. The second blanket and Tolmie story involved Dr. Tolmie, who was very, very immersed in the ways of the Coast Salish. He understood the native mindset. He studied the Coast Salish language. He actually started writing a dictionary of it. So he knew that at that killing where Wallace had fallen, 5 Native Americans had also been killed, 2 of which were from the assaulting tribe, 3 of which were locals. Local Nisqually tribal members had been killed that day. To assuage their families, Tolmie himself went to his own trade shop with his personal money and bought blankets to give to the families of those killed in that melee. And it was usually a shroud for the burial, and it was 1 blanket or 2 blankets, something of that nature. As a, I'm so sorry this happened to you, here's a blanket. It was the tradition of the time and the Coast Salish. These 2 stories somehow wound their way down to Samuel Thurston. And because of his hatred of the company, and because he really wanted to damage as much of the Hudson's Bay Company, Company as he could, he came up with this version. It's the Samuel Thurston version. The Indians came to the fort, they killed Wallace, Dr. Tolmie got blankets, and paid the families of the Indians guilty that were hung. And he did this because he wanted to turn the Indians against the Americans. He did this standing on the floor of the U.S. Congress. This is what he told the congressman sitting in Washington, D.C. He said, this is what happened. This is the truth. We need to knuckle down on these guys. And so from that, within these letters, you see a cascading series of events that were brought on by the Millard Fillmore administration to start suppressing the Hudson's Bay Company's ability to do business. And you see it in a number of ways. And of course, word gets back that this is what Thurston is saying. And I got a quote here, what Tolmie says. He said, it's contemptuous trickery, he calls it. Ridiculous. And an attempt to stir up the pot. These are things that are in the letters. These are the quotes. Once he heard this, the word got down to Peter Skeen Ogden, who was a big correspondent in this work. Many of you have heard of Peter Skeen Ogden. And Peter Skeen Ogden blew up. He said, I can't believe they're telling the U.S. Congress these lies about us. They're lies, complete lies. And so he writes to Governor Lane. He says, and these letters are included here. We're the ones that went and saved the people when the massacre occurred down at the Dalles and there at the Whitman Mission. I was the one, he says, I was the one that went down there and got them and paid for their ransom with my own money. So there's a lot of this back and forth in these letters that you see where Americans are just really messing with the Hudson's Bay Company as best they can. The result of the Thurston thing was they blockaded traffic between Victoria and Nisqually. They said no British ships can enter these waters anymore. And of course, Moses, who the picture was up earlier, he was in complete concert with Thurston, and they all just rode right along. And hopefully, if WSU picks up the second version of this, you see another guy come into the territory who was absolutely of this mindset, and he was the new first territorial governor, Isaac I. Stevens. He came with a mandate to destroy the Hudson's Bay Company. And you see that in the next series that Wazoo was not allowed to put in this group. They didn't let me go that far. But in the next series of letter, he basically comes down and tells Tolmie, you can't even trade with the Indians anymore. We forbid it.
Steve?
Yeah.
You might also point out that in 1846, the treaty between Great Britain and the United States specifically included the rights of the companies to possess the land and continue business as a foreign entity in the United States territories.
Right.
They had the legal right to continue both Hudson's Bay Company and Puget Sound Agricultural Company operations, regardless of what the tax or export and import people wanted, regardless of what the citizens wanted. The right was in the treaty. Just like the Indian Treaty that was so abrogated by Mr. Stevens, so was the International Boundary Treaty of 1846.
So we have this series of events that, though seem small, they begin to cascade, and it all starts with Samuel Thurston's big lie, the fake news of the 1850s, that the Hudson's Bay Company is here to get the Indians to turn against the Americans. And this is kind of a theme you see throughout the letters. They think that the Brits are here to turn the Native Americans. Well, they obviously had some connections in terms of a lengthy period of time, trade-wise, and in some cases marriage, but Jerry's right. The treaty said, hey, they've got the right to do this. You can't block these. And these petty individuals coming down here making these decisions on their own was quite upsetting to Dr. Tolmie, who was a very learned guy. I mean, he was very skilled in a number of areas, medicine being one of them, but he was also a herbologist and an ornithologist. He chased birds all over the place. And that was kind of an interesting thing to find out about him. There are other aspects to the Americans' assault on the British. Next year when the book comes out, you'll have to check those out to see what they're. There's a number of instances in there where Moses and the he calls them the pirating plunderers of Olympia. I mean, he's got all these really colorful words that he calls these customs house officials down in Olympia. But they're just out here to plunder us. They're just stealing from us basically. And then there's Moses' other kind of shadier side, that he was working bribes and working under the table deals. And I remember one specific letter from Douglas says, don't believe anything that Simpson P. Moses says unless it's written in paper. He says, do not accept anything he says face value. So leave it at that. That's one of the overriding themes of this series of letters about corruption in the American customs system, but also the lies on Congress and how it affected the future of the company in the territory. Now, I'm going to turn...
One more thing.
Yes, dear.
You might also be aware that the British had established naval headquarters, Royal Navy headquarters at Esquimalt, near Victoria. They had enough firepower on those ships to destroy Olympia, Silicon, and every Indian village in Puget Sound without ever getting a sailor off the boat. They could have come in with cannon, boom, 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 and it would have been British territory instantly. They held back because they didn't want to go to war with the United States besides, they were busy with the war over the Crimea at the time. So they held off. But they had the power to do that. Most Americans were just tweaking the British every chance they got.
A lot of historians from the 1905-1910 period call this the twisting of the lion's tail. Anytime these little intricacies would be happening, that's a twist. They're twisting it. So they're not really destroying it. And one of the chapters I start off by saying these blockades and all these things didn't work because the company was, after a while they said, okay, fine, we'll just employ American ships. And they started using American vessels to transport their goods back and forth. And we don't know, we don't have that side of the story, but we think maybe Simpson P. Moses was working on them too a little bit. So there was a lot of things going on here that probably wouldn't be legal, and we think that's what got Moses fired, which happens at the end of this book. He gets canned because of his under-the-table stuff. Anyway, let's go to the next slide, Alex. I want to talk a little bit about this before we wrap it up here. Y'all don't know this guy. Well, Marion does. This is Henry B. Chapman. He's a Steilacoom resident. He was also the guy that, this is the reason you have what's the street? Union Street in Steilacoom. Okay, why do you have a Union Street? What's that all about? Well, he got here late. Bolsh was already there. He'd set up the port of Steilacoom, which runs north and south. He was a surveyor. He says, I don't like it north and south. I want to go along the shoreline this way. I want to parallel the shoreline, not go north and south. So where Union Avenue is the left side goes off to the shoreline. That's Chapman's survey. The right side is Bolsh's survey. And that's why you have a Union Street is where these two guys' surveys came together. And they hated each other for it. They really did. But Henry B. Chapman's an interesting guy. And I wrote a paper that got in Tolmie magazine here a few years ago. And when I was living in St. Louis, a family moved there for a while. I was unemployed at the time, but I had this burning desire to understand the map on the left, which many of you probably have seen. It's referred to as the Tilton map by James Tilton, who was the Surveyor General of Washington Territory. And it's dated 1855. In fact, it's the John B. Chapman map of 1852. He didn't sign it. And the map you have over here on the right is my version of John B. Chapman's map based on USGS numbers. Go ahead, Alex, put it up there. That is the claim of the Hudson's Bay Company in Pierce County in 1852. And if I had a pointer where the little red line comes in down there, that's Chambers Bay right there. Where the word Tacoma is, that's Chambers Bay. It grinds up through, actually it's more than that, it's actually at the end of the golf course, Chambers Bay Golf Course. That includes all the golf course there. And then it grinds up through the ridge top along Lower University Place, around the ridge over Fred Meyer, which was called Palila, which was named after a Hawaiian bird, but I'm not going to get into that. Up through the valley, up through that little narrow slit, which was referred to as the Puyallup Swamp, and then over to Old Town. All of downtown Tacoma, all the way down the Puyallup River, all the way out to Lake Towson, all the way down the Ohio Valley, all the way down to the Nisqually River. That's 252 square miles. That was the claim of the Hudson's Bay Company back in 1852, and that's why the Americans were pissed off. Pardon my French. They wanted that land. And this was the claim that the Hudson's Bay Company had by this period. This book covers the period of time that Henry B. Chapman made this survey. All the little squares there, those are all sheep farms. All the big squares, those are all major farming installations. The company had this entire land covered with sheep, horses, and all the like. Matter of fact, anybody here from Spanaway today? Oh yeah, Marion. Well, you know this story, but I was sitting in the Tacoma Historical Society one day, and the president of the Spanaway Historical Society comes in and says, oh, you're Steve Anderson. We talked a little bit, and I said, do you know why it's called Spanaway? And she looked at me, oh, I don't know, because it's the span between Tacoma and the mountain. I said, no, it's a Lushootseed word, and Jerry helped me out with this one. He says, it's Lushootseed for where the root digging is good. Spanaway. And they just anglicized it as Spanaway. So if you ever drive through Spanaway and you want to go out and get some roots, that's where you go. Because all the swamps are there, and I mean, it's good root digging, apparently. So that's out over in this part here. But Chapman had to do this map, and he's an American settler. He apparently convinced him. By the way, in the book, I included his agreement with Tolmie to do this. It took Tolmie about a year to get warmed up to this Irishman. finally said, okay, you got the tools, you got the equipment, you need some men. We're going to give you some guys who go out and do this right. Because throughout these letters, you have an attorney down in Oregon City telling Tolmie that you need something that can hold up in court. You need, and his name was Amory Holbrook, by the way. He was an attorney for the state, but he was also the Hudson's Bay Company's attorney. And he's sitting there telling Tolmie, you need something that's accurately drawn. If you can consider what Chapman is accurate, I think this is far more accurate because it actually aligns with USGS maps. But he says you need something that's been authentically surveyed and then put into the Surveyor General's office to stand up in court. You need that if you go to court with all these squatters that are moving in and taking land here and what's that. You need something that's authentic. So Tolmie hires Chapman after a year of thinking about it. He gets him on contract. He sends his young clerk, Edward Huggins, out and about 5 guys. And they started their survey up there around the end of the golf course area on Chambers Bay. And they started working. And they said they got down here, probably over in this area. They were actually going like this. From what I could perceive, they were like crisscrossing the county, going back and forth as they did the survey. They got there about the middle to where Mud Creek is, and they were met by an armed mob of squatters who said, if you make one more notation in your book, if you set up that transit one more time, we're going to shoot all of you. These are American settlers, by the way. I forgot that little point. Chapman, being an American, said, ooh, I didn't get it in for this, I'm going home. And so he went back to Stillicum. The rest of the crew came to Nisqually, and the day book of that says the survey crew unexpectedly showed up today, having been threatened with their lives by our mob, and it named all the people. By the way, if you're a descendant of one of those people, his name is in there. And then about 3 weeks later, Tolmie went and got Chapman, they went out and quietly finished the survey. So that's how they got the lower half of Pierce County done up. So I'm hoping that WSU does a better job with the map than I've done with it, and Marion, you did some work on it too. So we kind of got this thing looking kind of like it should. Some of the sites are a little speculative, but we think we got pretty much all the sites. I didn't really put names on them for this program, but I do have one that's got all the names of the different plains. And by the way, Dairy Plain is the name of the one that's right here. This is Dairy Plain. This is where all the cows were that they could milk. So they called it the name of the place Elk Plain. You ever heard of Elk Plain? That's where all the elk were.
You have no idea how I had to argue with my editor to capitalize Elk Plain, Dairy Plain. Those were the names of the place.
Yeah.
She said, no, those don't need to be capitalized. Yes, they do. There's the name of the place.
Well, even here, we have a representative from the American Plain where the mission was. That is American Plain because of the American mission that was there in 1842. They called it that because that's where it was. So American Plain is the one that runs up there, kind of between American Lake. Oh, which by the way is American Lake.
Am I correct that the Dairy Plain is the impact zone?
If this is the impact zone, yes. This is where the plain was right here.
Yeah.
That's where the cows were. That's where the milkers were. And we think that the dairy was actually located about where the Dupont exit is. So Jerry's right. They had like 10,000 head of cattle here, and I think maybe about 1,000 that could be milked. So they were busy milking things. So we're down to questions and answers. Before we get into that, I want to make one final kind of comment about what Jerry and I are doing, and we've talked about this on the phone and in person and texting back and forth and back and forth. When people talk about the pig war, you guys know what the pig war was, right? 1859, a whole bunch of military guys got up in Salmon Island, a whole bunch of British came out in their big boats, and Jerry was talking about their guns, and they all lined up, and they're all going to have a big fight over a Hudson's Bay pig that was shot by an American, right? Or was it an American pig shot by a Hudson's Bay guy? Anyway, one pig was shot by somebody else, and everybody went berserkers. I mean, they were going to go full tilt boogie on shooting war up on Salmon Island. Matter of fact, that's where my friend, colleague, Doreen Beard is. They're up there doing the reenacting of that particular thing. Well, Jerry and I started thinking about it. We started thinking about all these little atrocities that were occurring all throughout the decade, because trust me, this is only the first 3 years. So we look into the 40s, we look into the Indian War period, we look into all this stuff going on. James Douglas was involved, Tolmie was involved. They all saw the wrongs here, and at one point, like I said, Douglas says, hey, this is a friendly nation, why are they doing this? So we think, Jerry and I, we're going to throw this out to the public for the very first time, that all these little hurts and pains that occurred during the 50s resulted in the final straw being dropped up in the Salmon Islands and resulted in the pig war. Because a simple pig being shot is not going to result in three troops or movement of troops to San Juan. It's not going to result in the British Navy rolling in and putting their ships offshore, and arming their cannons and arming their rifles. And that seemed kind of stupid. And actually, the British Admiral Bain says, yes, it is stupid, go home. But
the British had 1,800 Marines on those ships ready to land. Fort Silicon had 5 cannon for the artillery. The Americans would have been so overwhelmed within an afternoon that the whole Puget Sound would have been British. I mean, there is no way the British could have lost it at all.
Fortunately,
they were so restraining. They held themselves back because they were trying to be fair, and that's sort of.
Let me plug my book. And Angus MacDonald, who I did write a book about that's over here, he was actually in the harbor when Admiral Baines came back. And I don't have a picture of the ship that Admiral Baines was on, but Angus was just blown away by it. He says, this is a weapon of destruction. This thing had like 3 rows of cannons. And he said everything was bright and shiny, and they were going to go to war. Boy, was Angus ready for that. He's another character that, he was actually here in 1855 during the Brigade Cannon, so there's a whole chapter dedicated to just him being here. But he talks about all the shining guns, and boy, I'm ready to see this go on. And then he says, but Admiral Baines just looked at the whole situation. This is stupid. He went something like, silly people, tut, never mind. We're not going to go over there and do that. So the whole thing kind of fizzled out. But all the stressing, and all the tweaking, and all the twisting of the lion's tails throughout the 50s is probably, in Jerry's, in my opinion, humble opinion, is what caused the pig war to happen. Everybody was so tense. Everybody was so bound up about all the injustices that were occurring down here, and they'd seen all this frivolous stuff going on. They'd seen all this other stuff that you've never heard about in the history books. And trust me, I've been at this for 30 years. I've never heard all this stuff. And it was just like, whoa, where's all this coming from? And it was in these letters. It was right there in black and white. So our hope is we get this one off. Maybe WSU will say, yeah, we like this. Let's do it again. And we'll do the next set. And the book is set up, and it'll be coming out in September of next year if WSU Press holds me to the mark. And it's set up in the cycle of the company's, how did I do this? Cycle of the company's outfit. So an outfit was a fiscal year for them. So I thought about it in terms of the letters Tolmie's writing, the movement of men and equipment, that probably setting it up by their fiscal cycle made sense. So it's every 6 months it starts a new chapter, whether there's something going on or not. And that's the middle of the cycle or the end of the cycle. And you see at those periods of times, new men coming in, old men going out, things changing, people getting promoted, people retiring. There's a lot of stuff that occurs around the ends of the cycle. So it made for interesting ways to end and start chapters is when you do it. And I always start in the middle of the year, January. In January, we're shearing the sheep. That's what they did in June and January, or June and July was sheep shearing time. And they'd be out here, these plains would be covered with thousands of sheep. And they'd bring them all here. And Alex, I don't know, could you back up to that slide of the fort? I don't know if you can back up or not. And my deepest apologies to the Dupont people, but the picture you have of Fort Nisqually is wrong. Keep it on that one. This is what it looked like. This is standing across the Qualachie Creek looking to the southwest. The palisade was 20 feet tall. It wasn't 10 feet. It was made of poles, not slabs. The bastions were kind of squatty and grotesque looking. These buildings in the front area here, that's a piggery on the left, that's a shearing house on the right, and that's a slaughterhouse. The 2 buildings behind it is Nisqually Village. That's where the Indians and some of the laborers lived. Not everybody lived in the fort. The main gates of the fort were actually located on the other side and this side. This is the water gate. This is the gate they went out to get water. It wasn't very big. I know at Point Defiance it's huge, but this is what it really looked like. By the way, this is a depiction of a snowfall in, I think it was January 4th, 1857. And I told Lee that because of the Historical Society's generosity, they're actually financially helping this book come out. This painting is actually at my mom's house right now. It's going out to the Puyallup Fair tomorrow. If it doesn't sell, you guys get it. If it does sell, I'll make you another one. I'll make you a better one than this. So you guys are going to get one of the authentic view from across the creek. Now there's Qualachie right there. It's right outside. Actually, it's in the right position too. And this actually did happen in 1857. They had a foot of snow, foot and a half of snow fall overnight, and the next day it was clear. So I thought that'd be an interesting way to show the place and show it in a way that.
So the tree line is where the creek is? I'm trying to understand.
This is the creek.
Oh, okay.
Right there.
Oh.
There's a little bridge right there, and it goes on between the houses this way.
Oh.
This is developed from a site plan in 1847 when all these buildings still existed. And this is what it really looked like. This is not imagination. By the way, the covered wagons probably didn't happen. So I know the version you're dealing with at the Dupont Museum is one that was created in the 70s, which is heavily laden with Americana type things, but no.
It's kind of a hill that goes down the street.
Yep, kind of a slight rise there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it goes up. So I don't know if I got the dimensions in terms of how far it's away from the creek, but I was guessing. You know, I was sitting in North Carolina when I did this, so I kind of figure out. But I've been out there enough to know the creek is kind of like that, and the buildings are associated with the creek that way, so they can wash the sheep. They dam it up, and then they wash the sheep in the creek. And the slaughterhouse is there, so all the blood and stuff can go into the creek.
So you actually found old foundation stuff?
No, I went off the 1847 site plan. Tolmie drew the site
Oh, you
from a top-down view, and these are the buildings that were there. So I assume they were still there by 1857, because they were still shearing sheep, and they were still slaughtering animals, and doing all that fun stuff. And these pens that we see here for the horses, these are horse pens. And the only difference I made with them is the originals, they go into the creek, so the horse could then get a drink if they wanted to. I decided that looked a little weird, so I just kept them at the top. But they had fencing all over that area. The gardens and the swamp was over here. I thought that was kind of interesting, but maybe somebody will get to that too. But generally, that's what it looked like in 1857. And
Piggery had an access to the water too, so you can imagine the horses drinking piggery water.
oh yeah. That's why everybody was getting sick. Matter of fact, Edward Huggins, the guy who lived out here until 1905, he says something they've discovered. There's microbes in the water. That's why we've been getting sick all these years.
They were taking the water above the cattle?
That is the water gate. When you get water for the inside fork, you walk down here and you pick it out of the stream.
Right.
That's why.
So they're grabbing from the same place there?
Absolutely.
They're washing the sheep there, their pigs are watering themselves, the horses are watering themselves. To wash the sheep, dam across the creek, make it a big puddle, and fill it with tobacco slurry, just really thick with tobacco,
To kill them.
and then drive the sheep through. They would come out the other side, they'd have killed all the bugs in the wool, and while they're shaking and getting the water off, they dry out a little bit so they can be sheared with clean wool.
I was going to mention too, I have 2 copies over here. I didn't bring a whole lot because airplane fees and all that, but I did do 2 books on the Indian accounts of the fort. And this was kind of an early project. I did it myself, and I've got 2 versions of that over here if anybody wants to get one from me. But during the sheep shearing periods, they would employ up to 100 Indians to do the sheep shearing. That was about 5 times as many Native Americans as Caucasians working, French Canadians working. Amazing numbers of people, and in some cases, these Indian account books that the Hudson's Bay Company kept because of accounting purposes. This is the only place in the world that person is on paper. The rest of the time, they were just it's verbal. It's Native American oral history traditions. But in those books, they're actually listed, and they say, well, this person. He's in the Nisqually, or he's a Puyallup, or he's a Snoqualmie. They actually sometimes list where he's from because they're trying to account for these folks. And in many cases, their names are so unintelligible that the British, the Scottish clerks cannot say their names. So they say, well, forget the name. You're now Bob, or you're now Dave, or you're now Larry. I mean, they would literally say that, and that's what we're going to call you from this point. So they'd phonetically write their Indian name down. They said, now we call him Bob. Well, unfortunately, they named about 5 people Bob, and they didn't distinguish between which Bob was which. So it's like you're going nuts trying to figure out who these guys are. But it really gives you a sense of how intertied the Native American, what Jerry was talking about, being here. The Hudson's Bay Company employed these folks and employed hundreds of them each year. I think at one point it was up to 250 during the major movement of cattle and sheep and stuff. They had to have all these folks out there running around, including where we grew up in University Place on the Playa Plain, which is now the nexus of Silicon Creek and, what's the other one that runs off? Leech, yeah, Leech and Silicon Creek, right there at Fred Meyer. So, I was walking around there the other day and told somebody, hey, you live in a former sheep park. Anyway, so that's all I've got. I guess we can open up for questions. I guess we got 2 minutes for questions. Yeah.
Steve, I'm wondering, did any of the other Hudson's Bay Company forts have a agricultural company that's next to them that?
Yes.
Or are we the only one that did?
Cowles Farm was all agriculture,
Cowles, okay.
but they did have a small trade shopping aspect in it. Fort Vancouver had an extensive farming operation, and it kind of dwindled out after the Portland, Oregon City group kind of got in there and started taking the land.
Steve,
Yeah,
those were all aspects of the Puget Sound Agricultural Company.
right.
They had the farms, but the company was Puget
It's
Sound
the
Agricultural.
same company, but they were in the different forts.
Yeah.
Right, right. The agricultural branch of the Hudson Bay Company was treated separately. And Tolmie oftentimes in his letters, it's funny because he's saying, hey, look, guys, you've got people out there that started after me that are getting advanced in rank and are getting more money. What about me? What am I, chopped liver? Come on, guys, I need a raise here. I need to be a chief factor. And he continually in the early 1850s says that. Matter of fact, in 1851, he's talking with Douglas about retiring. He says, I'm ready to come up to the island. I'm going to get my aunts from Scotland. We're going to come up there and make a big farm on our own in 1851. And then he finds out the guy that they have coming in to replace him is a nutcase. And he says, I don't think I want to do this now. It really hurt the operation. I think I'll stay on for a while. So he ends up going out to Tlithlo, which is Madigan Hospital. The Tlithlo farm area is Madigan, right in there. And he ends up being a nutcase. Yeah, he's quite a piece of work.
Let's do some real history now. Real history. That fellow there on the right-hand picture with all that white hair,
Yeah, right here.
that's me. When I had hair. The lady that's sitting down there with the high seat sign, that's my wife sitting in her wheelchair.
That's Elaine. She couldn't make it.
We got the picture so that it didn't show her wheelchair. She's wheelchair bound, brain injury and a stroke. The guy on the left picture,
This is a good advertisement for Husser's Navy Royal Rum.
I thought that's what that.
That's Husser's, yep. Good stuff. Yeah.
it's a little like Steve.
That's my birthday this year. So.
Notice it's a little tipsy too. I mean, the head is.
How would you know?
The head
You
is.
were there. So, any other questions? Yes.
This is, well, not exactly, well, some kind of related, not exactly what we've been talking about. But there's always those grave markers and stuff. Can you enlighten us about who they were, or do you have any ideas?
You mean the graves at Mallard Hollow? Yeah.
One's right,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's Mallard Hollow.
Is that
That's what it's called. That was the traditional place, and I think Charles Forrest is buried there. I think there's a couple Native Americans buried there, and that guy that died on the Fiskard, the musician who drowned in Chambers Bay was buried there. And there's a couple other settlers that got buried there too. So, and I thought they were marked in terms of who's in the ground, but Charles Forrest is one of them.
There's 3 of them that we know who they are.
Okay.
Forrest, Leggett, and Edgar. We know there's 4 Native Americans out there.
John Edgar's in the buried out there. Okay.
Where is the grave?
Well, if you go to the 43 side over here, you know the trails kind of go around it. There's a little hollow there. Matter of fact, the painting I'm working on right now is called Sunrise at Mallard Hollow, and it's kind of like, it's just a little swooping in the ground, and that's where they all are down there.
Okay.
They bury them.
Opposite side of the
Yeah.
dairy, or the farm.
Yeah, it'd be the other side of the fort, the south side of the fort, and it's just a little depression. There used to be a hill there, but then they put houses in, so the hill's gone. But yeah, that's Mallard Hollow. And not many people know that either. But when they refer to it in the books, it's Mallard Hollow. So I guess that's where they had a little swamp.
Swampy, and the birds came in.
Birds fly in there. Yeah,
Named after the birds.
they go blow the birds up and have duck for dinner or something.
Well, what the Indians did, this is kind of clever. They'd get a net, stretch it between 2 posts, and either put it up or put it down, depending on the situation. If the birds came in and the net and posts were up and they landed, just lay it down. You got dinner. Nobody has to go out hunting dirt birds, hunting. You got what you want. You let the ones go that you don't want. You keep the ones you do want. Another way they did it was at a flyway, a place where it's real narrow. The birds would come in after springing on birds would get caught in that net. And then they put it down, the birds, easy, go pick them up. Yeah, they were smart people. Smart people. They wanted to hunt deer, so they'd go to a swampy area, cut the brush away on one side so the deer could get down to the water. Let it be that way for a couple of years. Keep the brush back. And then after a couple of years, the deer would come down and real comfortable and real calm. They'd close off the place, and now they got a deer. All they got to do is shoot it. They didn't go out and sit in the woods for hours and hours and hours like we do, waiting for a deer to walk by. They waited for the deer to come down to get water, like they will do, and then they get the deer they want. If they don't want that one, they let it go. They, no, that's a nice little doe. We'll let her go. Well, look at that big buck, we'll take him. I mean, they were smart people. Those houses they built. Think of it, they hung things from the ceiling. It's really, oh look, we do too. They were smart people. We denigrate them because they lived all in this one big long house. We call it an apartment house. They have open fire in their places. We call them fireplaces. They were smart people. When they were living on dirt floors here in Nisqually, many people in London were living on dirt floors with a grass thatch roof. These people had a solid wood roof. The smoke went up. They'd use a pole, move the board over, let the smoke out. When the rains came, use the pole, move the board back.
Jerry, these guys got to eat salmon every night.
And what?
Eat salmon every night too.
Okay, so why not?
Yeah, Jerry and I, we've talked over the years, and the stories. There's so many of these stories that we didn't discuss today, and the letters only kind of pull from this 3-year period. Hopefully, we can do more, but I've really enjoyed getting into it, and like Lee said, I don't want to become the historian of every site I work at. When I worked at Renton, I did some of their history too, but you know what? A lot of it was related to the Hudson's Bay Company up on the Duwamish River. Ouvries River, for instance, which is referred to in Tolmie Journal, is the Black River around Renton. And he called it